My name is Trish Ware, and I am obsessed with all things pregnancy and birth, and helping you to navigate both the practical and the magical seasons of this journey called motherhood. I'm an all-day coffee-sipping mama of 7. I've had the amazing privilege of delivering many babies in my 15-plus year career as a labor and delivery nurse and as a mama of 7. I'm here to help you take the guesswork out of childbirth so you can make the choices that are right for you and your baby. Quick note, this podcast is for educational purposes only and does not replace your medical advice. Check out our full disclaimer at the bottom of the show notes. Hello, everyone, and good morning. Today, my guest is going to rock your world. Her name is Sam, and she is a certified sleep consultant. I'm going to let her give you all the details. But when I say that sleep you're going to be obsessed with sleep at some point of your journey into motherhood. So we're going to talk about busting some myths and bringing some truths and how to not ever say never. As both of us have experience in this, and I don't know, Sam, if you know, but I have 7 children. So I learned not to say never. So Sam, just go ahead and tell everyone who you are, what you do, and also tell us how you landed on what you're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to chat with everybody and bust some myths because those need to be addressed for sure. But to tell you a little bit about me, so my name is Samantha Day and I live in Tennessee. I'm a Chicago native, but live in Tennessee now. And I have been married to my husband for almost 20 years. And then my children are 10 and 11 years old. And I actually went into my career as a behavior specialist. So my degree is a learning behavior specialist. And my goal was always to work with children on the autism spectrum or with some type of special needs. And that still holds a very special place in my heart. But what happened was I was in the classroom setting, working mostly with children with autism for the first 10 years or so of my career. And then I had my children, and I am not the happiest person in the world when I don't get sleep. I'm going to be honest. Like most of us, we know how important it feels, right? When we are well rested and how great we can do in our lives and how many things we can cross off that to-do list when we are well rested. But then we become moms and there's a big bump in the road with that. So my son came naturally. He had age appropriate sleep that involved night wakings and shorter naps and all the things. But when he got to an age where sleep was able to be stronger, I wasn't sure how to get there. So what I started doing was brainstorming some behavioral things from my background and just kind of implementing foundational behavioral things to make sure that he could predict what's next and have routines and all of that. And it started to work. So I did some more research on the sleep side of things. At that point, that's what I didn't know was the science and the sleep portion of it. So as a new mom, I did all the research, and what I found was a lot of contradicting information. And that's so overwhelming. So at that point, to kind of, sum up the story a little bit, I decided to make sure that the information I was getting was actually accurate. And I started working with my son using both the science of sleep and the behavioral background. And the combination of the two made him sleep really, really well. Between about 4 and 5 months old, we reached some big goals. And so never cared much about helping other people with sleep. But for me, that was a huge celebration at that time. And I was at a stage in my life where all my friends were having babies as well. So they would say, "What's going on? How is he sleeping so well? Help me." And so that turned into me helping my friends and saying, "Well, try this or maybe try that." But it kept working. So eventually, after about a year or so, I realized how much I loved this. And it was actually my husband who stepped in and said, "Hey, you light up every time another mom is actually rested and their babies are getting sleep too. What's going on here?" And he kind of made me explore that. And so I went back to school at that point and I decided I loved the sleep side of things. So I went back to school and I got certified in the science of sleep and learned what it really takes to reach that restorative sleep that we're all looking for. And then I decided to start my business after that. So although the sleep side was huge and I'm very thankful, obviously that was needed to get that education, I would say that what I feel sets me apart is that the behavioral side is so important. Sleep really is a learned behavior for many, many children. Of course, some babies come out and they have better sleep, hygiene than others. But while there are some babies that need to learn new behavioral patterns to reach the sleep we're looking for. So it's the combination of that that's guided me to having this business now. For about 10 years, I've been partnering with families.
I love that so much. And as you're talking, I was like, okay, I've got some questions because you and I were talking about the fear. There's so much fear, and there's a lot of fear mongering that happens when you're pregnant. And I tell my mamas all the time, we have a whole lesson that we talk about creating boundaries when it comes to horror stories, because I don't know why. Like, someone tell me why women especially feel it necessary to scare the bejesus out of every pregnant person. Like, why do we do that? Why don't we come along? It's like, I know this is a horrible it probably is a horrible comparison, but y'all know I say things. But if someone had cancer or an illness or a chronic illness or something, everyone would not be scaring them. They would be encouraging them. And I'm not trying to compare pregnancy and parenting to an illness or disease, but it's a difficult time in your life. That first year after having a baby can be very difficult and lonely. And here's a novel idea for those of y'all listening. Stop scaring people. Encourage them, because the truth of the matter is I've had 6 pregnancies. So one of my children is adopted. But I've done this journey 6 times, and each one was so different from the other. So there's nothing I could say absolute to any of them, to anyone about pregnancy or what have you. Anyhow, so I thought, why don't we talk about some of those big things, right? So I'm going to ask you some questions. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, I'm ready for it.
Okay, so if someone's pregnant, is it 100% guaranteed that she's going to get no sleep when she has her baby?
Absolutely not. Is it guaranteed that we're going to have night wakings? Of course, because it's age appropriate that babies are going to be needing to eat in the middle of the night and those types of things for a certain period of time. That period of time is different per child. But there are definitely things that we can do, that we can put into place to prioritize sleep, even in a period of time where we know that night wakings are potentially going to happen, right? So, and there are some babies that come out. I have had families come to me and they're ready to be prepared, and the baby starts sleeping through the night, like day 3. And we're going, what in the world is happening? So every single baby and every single birth is completely different, right? Sleep is possible. It's just, what is the path to get there? And some families are going to get there faster than others, but no. And we don't want to have that mindset either of, okay, well, I'm not going to sleep for the next year, because the positive, setting in our mindset is powerful.
Oh,
as
it's
well.
huge.
Yeah.
Huge. Oh my goodness. This is both of my businesses, both Labor Nurse Mama and my coaching business. I mean, in life in general, what you tell yourself really matters. And if you tell yourself like the first year is going to suck, chances are it will.
Absolutely.
It's how you approach it and how you look at it and how you frame it, and what you tell yourself is so stinking important no matter what you're approaching in life. So for a mom who is pregnant and going to have a baby, what are some of your top tips for her to do while she's pregnant to prepare for newborn sleep and mama sleep?
Yeah.
Because I always joke and tell my students, like, I understand after having Grayson, because I had a really difficult time, why they use sleep deprivation in prisoner of war camps.
Absolutely.
You'll be willing to do anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or say anything.
Yeah. And honestly, if we looked at like the most important things when baby comes, it's eating, sleeping, right? How many people say like they eat, sleep, and poop? That's all we do, right? But those are equally as important. How much we talk about like how often we're feeding and how many ounces that we're getting. It's also really important to look at sleep as well. But I think that going back to that fear mongering that you're talking about, we do often hear things like, get your sleep now, because when baby comes, nobody's going to be sleeping, right?
But none of that does you any good. That's not, you can't bank up your sleep.
Exactly.
So what can we do?
So that's the number one thing that I would say to look at is when you hear those types of things, because they're inevitable, take a deep breath and remind yourself that this is your individual journey.
Your story.
Yes. And then I would recommend that mom decides to do research on sleep that she feels, number one, for sure comes from a credible source, because there is a lot of information out there right now that is going to push the fear and that is not accurate. I was telling you earlier that I read something just a couple days ago, that an article that said children are not meant to sleep through the night until they're 6 years old. And the whole article went to explain about how they need nutrition overnight and X amount of ounces of food. And I was just, I was sick to my stomach as I was listening to it, only because imagine the one mom who's so desperate for sleep and then reads this article, and she has a, let's say, 11-month-old, and she goes, okay, well, I guess this is normal. I just have to deal with this for X amount more years and then it'll get better.
And then
right?
she doesn't pursue help.
Exactly. Because she finds something that makes it potentially feel relatable, even though that's not the case. So going back to your question of what can we do, make sure that you're doing research about sleep from a source that's credible and from a source that you feel like is going to fit your current version of parenting. Now that's going to change a million times, most likely, but that fits in your perspective of what feels right in your mommy gut, because there are a lot of different recommendations when it comes to sleep. So look at something that's science, how our body sleeps, and then that fits how you're feeling. So making sure that it actually is going to be credible information that focuses on what to expect when your baby is first born. Because yes, we are expecting some night wakings, but it's not going to be something that we, if we have our days and nights reversed, we can figure out how to switch those. It's not something we're stuck in for the next 5 months. So really focusing in the beginning, just learn about sleep, learn about how it works and what a typical or normal infant sleep pattern looks like, how we can use naps and nighttime to support each other. A lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, just skip the naps and they'll sleep better at nighttime. Worst thing we can do.
No,
Those
that
naps
is the
are
worst.
so important. So looking at the importance of naps and nighttime and how they work as a team together, and just kind of focusing on those expectations. Am I expecting one wake up overnight for the first month, or is it going to be a couple? And what do those look like? Just kind of giving yourself information. But something not to do is get too much information, because oftentimes we have too much at our fingertips. It becomes so overwhelming. And then we're in a place of having to ask ourselves, what do I want to do? And what's true and what's not?
Mm-hmm. I think that's good. And then I think, like, while you were talking, I know for myself, I had a perception of sleep training, sleep consultants, as it's going to be a lot of crying and me having to stifle my nurture feelings for this baby. And I'd love for you to address that, because I think that people, like, especially when you've got a mom who's listening to an older generation, they just have narrowed sleep training and things that you can do into I've got to let my baby cry it out box. So what would you say to that myth?
Well, I will say something funny about that myth before I answer the direct question. Is when I started my business 10 years ago, my dad, who's my number one cheerleader, had no idea why this was a thing. Because you look back at the older generation and they're like, just put them in their room and close the door. They'll be fine. But we have so much more information and education and studies by the time we're parents that, we're going to question doing that. And there are some families that still choose to, but what I would love to do, like you said, is talk about that cry it out and the truth behind it. Because I think where the controversy came into play on those words, cry it out and sleep training, is that most people think they're the same thing. That if I'm talking about training my child how to sleep, that I have to let them cry to figure out how to do it. And that's just not the case. So I actually don't call it sleep training at all. I call it teaching sleep, because there are some, yes. Absolutely. Going back to mindset, so important, because we train our dogs, right, to do something, but we teach our children. And sometimes they're easier lessons than others. But when we're talking about the behavior of being able to fall asleep, stay asleep, and then science takes over and the ability to connect sleep cycles and continue to stay asleep throughout the night, that first behavioral part of learning to fall asleep, that's going to come a little bit later, probably around 3, 4, 5 months is an age where we can start to teach that specific skill. But that is a learned skill. And so the only way, some people think the only way to teach your child to fall asleep without me having to nurse them, rock them, co-sleep, whatever, is to put them in their crib and close the door. And that's scary. I don't want to do that either.
I
And
know
I
it's
didn't.
scary. It's horrible.
Yes. And I didn't do that with either of my kids because, and this is the true answer to the question, there are so many other ways to teach that behavior of falling asleep and guide positive behaviors around sleep than to just close the door and let them cry. There's sleep teaching methods that we can choose that fit our parenting style. There's really, really, really gentle ones. There's very firm. And then there's a bunch in the middle. I personally am a fan of the middle of the road methods because a lot of times middle of the road ways of teaching our children new sleep skills involve a little bit of support and then a lot of independence. And you're kind of building that. I give support, then I give you a little time. Then I give you more support and a little time. And we can build up the independence and decrease our support as we feel more comfortable with it. And as they get to an age where they're actually able to take over some of those independent sleep things. But to bust that myth completely, cry it out is not the only way. In fact, it's not the way that I suggest at all. I think there's lots of other ways to communicate with our little ones, but consistency in our communication and routines are the most powerful things that we can do. So real quick, I'll say there's some families that want to say, okay, when it's time to teach my child to fall asleep independently, let's say, I'm never going to use cry it out. I'm only going to use this method. And they choose the method before they even get to that place.
Those are terrible words in parenting, though.
Yes.
Never and only.
Yes,
You're gonna eat that shit, I promise. Because I think about, as you were talking, and each child is so different. And what worked with baby number 1 might not work with baby number 5. Hey mamas, this episode is brought to you by CBR, the #1 OB/GYN recommended newborn stem cell preservation company. Bank your baby's cord blood and cord tissue at birth to help invest in your family's future health. Visit cordblood.com and use promo code LNM5 for exclusive savings today. You know, so and when you were saying, like, I don't even know what triggered it now, but when you were talking, I remember when Ian and Hunter were little, that's my oldest 2, and they were so behaved and like they kept their room clean. They would pick up after themselves. And I remember a mom saying to me, "How do you get them to do that?" And I remember being like, I tell them. I was so cocky. I didn't know it was because of who they were that it worked so well. I thought it was me and how skilled I was at being a mom. And then along comes Gavin, who wouldn't do anything my way, nothing my way. And it's so true with everything when it comes to parenting your children. And I think that's where that flexibility needs to come. And like you said, we're teaching them, but they're also teaching us.
Amen to that. Absolutely.
Because it might not work with your, like, I'm thinking about one of my team members just had baby number 2, and her baby number 1 is on the best sleep schedule. I was like, did she work with you? I don't know. I just messaged her to see if she was who recommended I talk to you.
Possibly.
It's Ashley.
Yeah, I believe so.
Anyway, but she just had baby number 2. He's like 9 weeks old. And when I was at her house, I was like, man, baby number 1 has the best. He's 17 months old, best schedule I've ever seen. And I remember thinking, oh, I hope baby number 2 follows this, but you do have to morph and adjust because their personality plays into it as well, who they are as people.
I actually love that you said that because a lot of times people will say like, this is the method I'm going to choose to guide my kids with sleep. But then the personality comes and you're like, oh, okay, I was going to pick something really, really gentle, for example, but I go in there and if I'm in the room, they want me to just nurse them to sleep and there's no in between, right? That's just an example, but personality plays a huge part in if we're teaching our kids a new skill.
Yeah. And just being flexible in that and not like, I think a lot of moms feel like I'm failing because what I've been taught or how I was told it should be is not working. But it's really not. It's about, it's like a dance you're doing with this particular child, and you have to find your rhythm.
Absolutely. Find the rhythm and then also make sure that we're trying to be consistent with that rhythm, because one of the strongest
Consistency is
ways
everything.
consistency is everything, especially even with her 4-month-olds or 8-month-olds. They're so young, but they still are picking up on those patterns and the consistency and are able to start predicting what's next. And when it comes to sleep and like our bedtime routine, for example, that's a huge part in allowing them to understand what we're trying to ask them to do. So
I mean, that's
routine
the
is
same
big.
for my brain.
Yeah.
My brain needs a sleep routine.
I love that.
It's
Good.
because if I bust out of it and I do things different, then my brain doesn't know what the heck's happening. So another one, we're just jumping from one myth to another. Is that okay with you? Because
Yes, I like
that's
it.
again how my brain works. So another one that I feel like is such a hot topic is contact sleep.
Mhm.
So what do you have to say about that? Let's talk about that.
So I think that I have different answers for different ages. So first, for families that want to contact sleep, co-sleep, and they want to do it from the beginning, of course, the main thing I'm going to say is make sure we're doing it as safely as possible, because, that's definitely a big piece of the puzzle. But if it's something that fits your family and you are getting sleep and baby is getting sleep, then I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with it. If we're getting sleep and it's a safe situation, I would say go for it. But a lot of times, contact sleeping isn't being done. Sometimes it's being done because we want to do it, but sometimes it's being done because it's
We've
survival
been
mode.
forced
And
into it.
yes, it's the only thing that we know how to do in order to get sleep at all. And sometimes even when we are contact sleeping, it's still not leading to sleep. We still have a baby or a toddler, or I had a 9-year-old a couple of weeks ago that came to me, the mom did, who had never been able to sleep without mom right there with her. And so sometimes that continues for a long period of time. But if we're doing it out of, this is all I know, I'm just doing it so that we can get the most amount of sleep possible, but it's still leading to broken sleep for you and for your child, my answer would be there are ways that we can set new goals. So if your goal is to co-sleep and we're getting sleep, go for it. But if your goal is independent sleep and you just don't know how to get there, then that's where we can reach out for help or do research from a credible source that's going to get you there in an accurate way, right? And everything, that's a transition like any other transition that we go through, and it's going to take some time, and it actually might get worse before it gets better, because we're going from one thing your child knew with you right there with them to something completely different, potentially, where they're independently in their bed. And that's a big difference. But I would recommend that if that's our goal, number one, don't let anybody make you feel bad about it, because that's something I hear often. Number two, have a plan so that you know from the night you start, we're going to address this from the sleep side of things, setting their body up for success before you even start. For example, making sure they're not overtired when we start this new plan or something like that. And then from the behavioral side, making sure that we're consistently cueing change with a new bedtime routine and being consistent when they do wake up in the middle of the night and we're trying to guide them back to sleep. So that's the biggest thing. If you do have goals to get out of co-sleeping, then we need to come up with a plan, and we need to have a mindset knowing this is a transition, and then consistently continue that until we get to our goals. It's absolutely possible, but we want to have a plan and be ready instead of saying, okay, I'm at my wit's end. This is enough. I'm just going to put them in the room and close the door, because a lot of times that's what happens. We go from co-sleeping to cry it out when there's so much more in between that we could
Yeah.
be doing to support your little one.
I love that. And I love that you said that there is there's probably thousands of camps when it comes to contact sleeping. But I love that you said there's also those moms who are doing it to survive, but it's not really necessarily what they want. And I thought when my daughter-in-law had my grandson, she was like, because I contact sleep with Grayson, and that's just, he was baby number 7. I just did. And I loved it. But she was like, I'm never doing that. It's never going to happen. And lo and behold, it's one of those never and onlys. And she ended up, but she didn't love it. And she didn't sleep well. And like for me, I slept great and it was fine. But she hated it. So I love that you said that, because there are people who find themselves co-sleeping that don't want to co-sleep, and there's answers to that for sure. So I love that's good. Are there any other like big elephants in the room that you feel people don't address that you hear often that you would like to address?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is the amount of social media that we take in nowadays can bring up the comparison game really quickly in our minds as moms in so many different areas, like
Oh
how
my
quick they're
gosh.
crawling or
Yeah.
whatever. But of course, that is a big portion of that can be sleep. You know, your best friend who had a baby a month before you is saying that their baby's sleeping through the night, 12 hours every night, 2 2-hour naps, that, lay them down, they go to sleep. And you're over here struggling, crying every night to sleep yourself because you have anxiety approaching bedtime every night because of how traumatic it can get. So I oftentimes have families come to me where they're like, I just don't know what I'm doing wrong. And they blame themselves in that situation because they're taking in a lot of those posts, or even just maybe not social media. Maybe it's just a conversation over coffee with a friend. But babies are so different. Toddlers are so different, and we want to make sure we're looking at your individual child and your goals and figure out where are we at now and where could we potentially get. Ultimately, we all want the same thing of our children being well rested, since we know that sleep is equally as important as eating. And this is a random fact, but we can actually go longer without food and water than we can without sleep. And I don't suggest that obviously, but I only say that because some people forget how important it is. And social media normalizes the lack of sleep, puts hashtags on shirts that says, hashtag tired as a mother. And we are tired and we all get it. But at the same time, let's not normalize the sleepless nights, because that doesn't make us love our children anymore. It makes us more irritable and harder to make it through the day, and we want to give our best version. So when we are continuing to have less sleep and night wakings and early rising into a year old, even 6 months, and on from there, all that's happening is you're not getting the sleep you need for your functioning in your body, and your baby isn't getting their sleep either. So prioritizing that and not letting all the extras change what you want to do or make you feel bad about it is probably my biggest, stay in our lane, set our
Yeah.
goals, reach our goals. We can do this.
I love that so much. And I think it's so funny how a lot of these concepts just spill over in all areas of life for mamas. And sleep is so important for both them and the baby to be able to function. And so when you start thinking about yourself and how you function when you're not getting the right sleep, it really hammers into you how important it is for baby as well to have the right sleep, and for your child. And I think I love that you talked about the comparison on social media. It is like I it's so funny because, like I said, I was having a coaching call with my clients. It's in all areas of life that social media can really, which is funny, going, my entire business is built on social media. But social media is what people want you to see. So, for those of you guys who are looking at maybe some influencers who are presenting a look of how their life is for their baby or themselves, just remembering that you're seeing what they want you to see. You're not seeing the whole picture. And I think that's where it's, like you said, it's really important that let's just learn from a valuable source, not just anybody who wants to tell you, and then implement consistently what you learn, but also being, and this goes for those of you guys who are pregnant, if you're talking about birth, if we're talking about, teaching your baby to sleep, teaching yourself how to parent, also learning how to listen to you, because you are so valuable. And I think that's really important when it comes to all of these things. And again, why I say don't say never, don't say only, because you are going to grow as a mother with each of your children as well. And just being able to recognize the value in your own voice. And I think that's an important thing to remember. So anything else that is a big takeaway?
Yeah, that was really powerful what you just said. I could not agree with that more. I think the biggest, like one more takeaway that I'd want to talk about is sleep connects to so many functions in our body. And I think it's important to recognize those when we get to an age where consecutive sleep is possible, which I usually say is 4 months and up, where we can reach a solid sleep overnight and more, not scheduled, but specific routined naps. We're looking at those deep restorative sleep sessions affecting growth, development, eating habits, behavior. The list goes on and on and on. But an example that I really like to talk about is I had multiple families who've reached out to me where their babies were really low on the growth chart, 8%, 10%, 11%. And that the doctors were saying, we still need to be eating overnight. Of course, we respect that and we build it into the plan. We can always do that. But what oftentimes happens in situations like that is when new sleep skills are reached, we all of a sudden start seeing that our babies sleep more solidly overnight and start taking more food throughout the day instead of a lot of different small meals through the day and the night. And so I just had a family I worked with a couple of weeks ago, and this was a huge concern. And doctor said, we want 2 feedings overnight. We went with it, but all of a sudden we started taking more food. We were more concentrated in our feeding sessions during the day, and that growth, that weight started going up and up. And so that's just an example, not to, it's not advice, but with this, we thought we had a growth concern. We thought we had a feeding issue. We weren't taking enough ounces when really once we got those sleep skills learned, we got to the point where that was no longer an issue. And now we're getting to right where we need to be. And those concerns are going away. So I thought it's really cool.
Well, as a nurse, that completely makes sense, because what contributes to health problems, including weight gain issues or whatever, is stress. And what contributes to stress is not getting enough sleep. And I just was talking to my 9-year-old about this because he's been sick. And I'm like, one of the most powerful things you can do is sleep. And we want to because I was like, he's not going to school because he's got strep throat. And he's like, well, can I stay up later? No, you're going to bed actually earlier because you need sleep. And for him, I equated that to charging my laptop, and all of my systems will run if I charge my laptop. And it's the same for our babies. Their digestive system is not going to work up to par if they're not recharging, if they're not sleeping. And for us as moms as well. And we can feel that. We know that. Like, we see that. Like, the way we respond to our family members, the way we process emotions, all of those things can be so affected by sleep. So that makes so much sense to me. Okay, so before we knock off here, because I know my pregnant mamas and they can only hang with us for about 30, 35 minutes, which I get it because I'm the same way. I want you to just tell everyone where they can find you. And I did figure out 2 things. It's Allison.
Yes.
Is who works with you. And I messaged my doula team because I have my 2 birth doulas and my postpartum doula. And I was like, who worked with Samantha? And it was Allison. And then second, for those of you guys, because we are on video right now, I just have to ask you, why do you have so many clocks on your wall?
Okay, hold on. Since we're on video, I'm just going to show you. Yeah, my whole wall is covered in clocks. So here's the story. My husband is obsessed with clocks. He just loves a good clock, but I don't like random clocks all over the house. So as a joke, we said, well, why don't we just put them all on one wall? And so we did. And from a different angle, they actually look pretty cool. But the other part of it is that I talk about timing of sleep constantly, because timing of sleep is like everything. So in my business, this was always my backdrop for all my podcasts and things like that, because timing is everything. So it started as a joke.
Well, that's the same for birth. I say the same thing when it comes to pushing, when it comes to go to the hospital.
Yes.
It can change the whole thing.
It's everything. So if it started as a joke, then I kind of liked it. And so now it's like our little interior design move.
Nice. My husband's obsessed with watches.
Okay.
Not clocks, but watches. I mean, I can't even with him in these like it's insane.
That's
but
so funny.
it was so nice to meet you today. And
You as
did
well.
you tell them where to find you?
Not yet, but
Okay,
we
let's
will.
do that. Okay.
So best place probably is to go to my Instagram page, which is Samantha Day Sleep Consulting. And then from there, you'll see links to everything else. You can go to my website. There's a bunch of free podcast episodes there that'll help you kind of absorb the information. And then I would say biggest thing is on my website, there's an infant sleep course, and it is for the pregnant mamas and mamas with newborn babies. And it's going to talk about those foundational things you can start with that really are going to lay that foundation to sleep as they get older. Nothing to do with cry it out, everything to do with the signs of sleep.
Awesome. And if Allison vouches for you, I know that that's good because
She's the best.
She's awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Hey, mamas, that wraps up our myth-busting episode on preparing for newborn baby sleep while you're still pregnant. Remember, knowledge is power, and being informed can help ease those pre-baby fears. We covered a lot of ground today, but just remember that each baby is unique, and staying flexible is key. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with other expectant mothers who might benefit. And don't forget, subscribe for more tips and myth-busting episodes. Until next Friday, this is Trish. I will see you again then. Bye for now.